who was the production designer on the film Mitchells versus the Machines made at Sony Animation. She was 2 years ahead of me at Ringling when I was there. And she kind of was a person who got into, Disney did an internship program, a summer internship program, and they hadn't for a long time, and they brought it back when I was in college. And Lindsay was one of the first people to go do that again. And so through her experience of doing that, I think that that introduced me to this idea that, oh, there's actually people who work at animation studios who get to draw and paint, but aren't necessarily animators. And that's always been the case, but I just had never known that. So while I was in school, I kind of went through this debate. Should I stay in my 3D major or should I switch over to illustration, which, was less animation focused, but would let me build up my drawing and painting skills. And, in the end, I decided that, maybe it was really valuable for me to have the experience of making a film. And beyond all of that, it was I would have had to have taken an extra year in college. And even 10 years ago, college was astronomically expensive in the US. So I ultimately decided to just stick it out and finish. And there was a time, I think, when I was unsure if that was the right decision, but now 10 years out, I totally feel like it was fine, and it's all worked out okay. So while I was in school, I was doing my 3D projects and, trying to work through it and get it made, and doing my best to add things to projects and spend time in places that made me feel happy and excited. And it paid off, thankfully. So while I was still in school, I was able to get an internship at Sony Pictures Animation. I was really lucky. Ringling had a really great career services program, and they brought a lot of recruiters to campus. So I was able to just kind of get some feedback early on, probably before most people were able to start getting that feedback. So I was very lucky there. And so after my junior year, I went out to Los Angeles for the first time. I got to work at Sony. It was very, very cool. I got to meet a lot of my heroes. And then I just kind of, took it upon myself to stay in touch with everybody who I met during that internship. And if you're someone who's lucky enough to get an internship, that would be my number one thing that I recommend is don't feel like it ends after the summer. Take those contacts that you made, be kind to everyone you worked with, be gracious to everyone you worked with, and use those valuable contacts that you made to help propel you forward. So after I graduated the next spring. I went and I worked for this company called Digital Domain, which is a company that it was known for being more of a visual effects studio. So I believe that they did a lot of the VFX for the Titanic movie in the 90s. And they did all of the visual effects for the Transformers movies. And they were doing this feature animation startup in Florida. And, I was able to kind of, I think, have an easier transition to that because I was going to college in Florida. And so this studio was setting up just on the other side of the state. And it was a really cool experience because it did feel sort of full circle for me, because I always had thought, okay, well, when I grow up and I, work in animation, I'm going to go live in Florida. So there were a lot of people actually who worked at that studio who had been at the Florida Disney studio when it existed, including the director, which was a man by the name of Aaron Blaise. If he does a lot of really great online learning things nowadays, but prior to him entering the sort of educational sphere, he was a director at Walt Disney Feature Animation. He directed the Brother Bear movie. And he was working on, an elephant movie at the studio called Digital Domain. So that was my first job. And I started as a trainee, and then I moved up to an apprentice, or I think summer intern, and then moved up into an apprentice. So I got to stay on and I did some character design and some other, really interesting things. However, that poor studio, it's been almost 10 years now, so no reason to feel bad anymore. But our CEO got in trouble for basically like embezzling money and stuff. So the whole building, was totally seized by the banks. It was very dramatic. You can look up footage on YouTube of this happening. Actually, it's kind of crazy. But yeah, overnight our studio just kind of closed, and everyone was sort of scattered to the wind. But yeah, you'll still see, like, I think Aaron even just posted something recently online about time at that studio. It was really a very interesting time. Yeah. But I really, as much as I loved working for the studio and I loved the project, it was kind of in the middle of nowhere in Florida, and I was 22 at the time. It was not where I wanted to be living. So in some ways, as someone who was in that phase of their life, I was kind of low-key relieved when the studio closed, because that meant that I didn't have to stay there for another, like, however many years it would take to finish the project. So I packed up all my things and I ended up moving back in with my parents in Northeast Ohio. I came from a small town, like 20,000 people or so. And it was a little bit depressing because I had gone from my dream of, designing for movies. And then I ended up getting a job at the local Starbucks because I needed to pay my student loans. And, the clock was ticking on that. And if you pause it for too long, yeah, the American educational system is a mess sometimes. But anyway, so while I was home, I was interviewing and trying to find my next gig. I really didn't know where I was going to go. I was talking to a couple different places. I actually ended up, I had a lot of my classmates had moved to New York City to go work for commercial houses and places there. So I had a couple of friends who had an apartment in Manhattan, which, again, this was 10 years ago. You could not find something affordable like that in Manhattan anymore. But at the time, I had some friends that had a couch in Manhattan. So I went and I crashed on their couch for a bit. And this actually happened during Hurricane Sandy, which was a very iconic time in New York, where like all the subways flooded, like the power shut off. It was really crazy. But while I was there, I did a little bit of in-house freelance for a couple different advertising studios, including a place called PsyOp, which was an interesting experience, and it was kind of fun to get a little bit of time in New York. But while I was there, this is sort of a roundabout thing. So years ago, I had been, not years ago, like the year before, I had been on Twitter. I was an early adopter of social media, and I posted that I retweeted that Google was looking for doodlers. Google had an account, and they tweeted that they were looking for someone to join their team. And so I retweeted it thinking, oh, I'm good, but I have friends that would love a job at Google. And long story short, I ended up getting in touch with essentially the art director there. And I ended up flying out for an interview. And then at the time I decided, I don't know if this is what I see for myself. I'd rather be in animation. So I stepped away from that interview process. And then, after the studio closed a year later, I wrote back to them and said, hey, actually, are you still looking? And, it ultimately worked out that they were. And so I got that job offer officially while I was in New York, staying with some friends. So I basically said, I would love to work for you. Can I start at the first of the next year? Because I think it was like Thanksgiving time at this point. So I came back home. I had like a nice, relaxing holiday with my family in Ohio. And then I packed my bags and I moved to California. So I was a Google Doodler living in the San Francisco Bay Area for about a year and a half or so, which was great. It was kind of what got me out to California. I still had that itch of wanting to work in animation. And without going into a ton of details, I wasn't particularly happy working at Google. It was a really great experience, very, very cool. I got to, have more exposure for my art than I probably will ever have before or since. You know, it was really, really just this amazing privilege to get to work for that company and have that kind of exposure. But in the end, you know, it wasn't really the type of work culture I wanted to be in. And I just really, really knew that if I didn't work in animation, I would regret it. And I needed to really do it and really go do it and not have, you know, this truncated experience that I had had before. You know, fall of 2014 or so, I started kind of, you know, seriously, well, before that, I started seriously looking for work in animation. And I had been doing some freelance with DreamWorks TV and then ended up getting a full-time offer to go work at Paramount Animation. So fall of 2014, I moved from the San Francisco Bay Area down to Los Angeles. So I found a little apartment, a little studio apartment, kind of right on the edge of Griffith Park. It's kind of on the other side of the mountains you see behind me now. And it was really amazing to get to work on the actual Paramount lot. It's literally in Hollywood. It's one of the few studios that actually is literally in Hollywood. I'm sure you've seen the lot in movies. It was very humbling to be a part of that and to get to work there. And that project was a little bit tumultuous, but you know, when I joined, I was told it would be this one director, and then it became a different director, and I think there was another director change in there at some point too. But as time has gone on, I have learned that that's just how it goes. Every movie is a little bit chaotic when it's getting made. But that was very, very cool, and I got to work with a lot of my heroes there, and I thought for a very long time that the movie I worked on wasn't going to come out. It finally did, like 4 or 5 years later. It's okay. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it's a movie called Wonder Park, and you know, very fun to get to design on. I feel proud of the work that I did when I was there, and you know, that show started kind of winding down, and I knew that I was going to need to jump and go find a new job. So I decided to start using the, you know, the network and the people I'd worked with and had built a relationship with to help me find my next gig. And that led me to Sony. So then it kind of was great because I kind of went back full circle and ended up back where I started. So I did a short stint there, and I worked on the Emoji Movie, which I know has a reputation online. But I will say it was the chillest job I had because character design is not particularly hard, I don't think, for emojis. And so I took a 2-hour lunch with everybody, and it was really great. We had a really fun time while we were working on it. So that was a shorter gig, and then that ended. And early the next year, I kind of, again, using my network of people who I've met and who I know over the years, ended up finding out that there was going to be an opening on this team at DreamWorks TV that was doing this really kind of like hyped up project. I had heard about it. It hadn't come out yet. But it was a Guillermo del Toro project, the famous director, and he was doing this animated show called Troll Hunters. And you know, my friend was art, well, or she wasn't art directing on it yet, but she was working on it. And she said, "Hey, I think you know, one of our artists just left. We're looking for somebody new." So I submitted my portfolio, and long story short, I started there, and I kind of did a couple of tail end things on Troll Hunters. I don't even know if I have a credit in it, which is fine. But I worked on all of Three Below, which was the animated series that's sort of like a spiritual companion to Troll Hunters. And then I worked on all of Wizards, the series, and then on the movie that came out, I think 2 summers ago, last summer, called Rise of the Titans. So I worked on most of sort of the Tales of Arcadia family while I was there. And it was great. I mean, it was such a great team. It was very hard work because we were trying to hit this level of beauty in the show that I don't know had been achieved by other animated shows up until that point. I think there's a lot of really great looking and beautiful animated shows out there now. But we were sort of one of the first ones that really pushed it. And it actually, a lot of that fell both on our partner vendor studios and also on the art department, because we were trying to be as absolutely specific as we possibly could in our model sheets that we sent to them. So a lot of times the way that we would paint characters and props and environments would almost be to a point where it looked like it was rendered in 3D. So getting to a point where we could hit that style, hit that look and that quality on the time schedule that you have in TV was really, really challenging. But I learned a lot, and I feel like that show, more than any other career experience, helped me grow. And I got so much better and so much faster. And I will always remember the show for that. The Tales of Arcadia shows, yeah. Those are the ones that made me really fast. So this was in, this is where it gets a little bit kooky. So fall of 2019, I think I had this thing that I think a lot of people have, where I turned 30 and I panicked a little bit, and I was like, okay, well, what do I do? Should I do this forever? Animation is a little bit, it's a gig economy. Like, you're going from show to show. And I was having this sort of internal debate of like, well, I love this, but do I want to do this forever? And I didn't really know what else I would do if I didn't do animation, which maybe says something right there. But I had a college friend who was teaching at this art school in Detroit, and I grew up not too far from Detroit, like 3 hours or so south. And I flew out there, I did a visit. I ended up really connecting with and liking the people who worked there. So I ended up applying to teach there, and then was offered a full-time position as a faculty member there. And I had agreed to start fall of 2020. And this agreement was made in 2019. So as we all know, spring of 2020 rolled around and the whole world just shut down. So I was still at DreamWorks. I was on another show. I rolled off onto the Boss Baby TV show. I think it's been announced that they made more seasons. So I was on that for just a bit, but it was a little bit of a thing where I knew that I was going to be quitting, but I couldn't go 6 months without a paycheck. That was just too long to make that work. So it was a very weird thing where I wasn't sure if they were going to make me go in person. And then if they weren't, should I stay in Los Angeles and, work on the show and finish it out? Like, I just couldn't figure out what to do. And then in the end, just decided to take a leap and, just do it. I think weirdly, it was kind of the best and the worst time to go do something big and different and crazy. So fall of 2020, I packed up my car, I took as much stuff as I could with me, and I drove across the country to Detroit, Michigan. And along the way, because I was afraid to stay in hotels, because we were still to a point where we didn't fully understand how everything was being transmitted. So I camped in national parks, which was very cool. It felt like a big adventure. Like half I drive like an SUV thing, so half of it was filled with my stuff, and the other half was this little air mattress, and I slept in the back. Crazy adventure, really fun. And so then I ended up living in Detroit, Michigan. And so my partner joined me later. And it was a very cool experience. I loved teaching. And we were doing quite a bit of like creative workarounds for teaching and giving people the best experience that we could, but like semi-remotely or like half in person, half remote, just trying to keep everyone as safe as possible during the pandemic. But what I got out of that was this is something that I really like. I feel like I get to give back to people and give the information that I wish I had had when I was a student and was interested in biz dev and didn't quite know where to go. So that's been really, really great. And I enjoyed being closer to my family. I loved the school, but I think my fiance is from Southern California originally, and it was very challenging being in a place that has full winters when you're with someone who, has never experienced that. So it was quite a bit of culture shock. And so I think out of the pandemic, I was able to have a bit of leverage and say, okay, well, I've been doing a great job in person. What do you think if I, go and live in Los Angeles, where the industry that I'm, building curriculum around is based? What do you think if I do that? And thankfully, they were willing to make that happen. So I think it works out for everyone, where I still get to be in the industry, in the thick of it, and I get to give students who are hoping to become a part of this industry an actual real connection to someone who's doing it for a living, who's teaching them. So that's worked out really great. And then as of October of 2021, like this actually started earlier, I think in like spring of 2021, I started doing freelance for this smaller studio called Wild Canary Animation. And when they asked me to do freelance, they said, I hadn't signed an NDA yet, but they said, this is for a TV show spinoff of a property that you definitely know, or a Disney property that you definitely know. So in my head, I thought, well, gosh, what could that be? I'm like, it's probably either Marvel or Star Wars. And so they sent it along and it was Star Wars. So that was really, really exciting. And I got to work on kind of really early stuff for the Star Wars show, and then ended up asking if they were looking for full-time people when they were getting ready to, start up the show, and they thankfully were. So I have been a full-time artist on this show called Young Jedi Adventures. It was just announced at Star Wars Celebration a couple weeks ago. So I've been doing character design, prop design, environment design, and a lot of color scripting actually, which has been really great. So the show, I believe, is slated to come out in spring of 2023, so next year. And I'm still on it. So that, I think, brings us up to date. I know that's quite a long, long span of time and lots of ups and downs, but yeah, I'd be happy to take any questions if anybody has anything they'd love to know more about. Oh, good. I'm so glad that you're excited for the show, Sophie. Sophie, I am too. It's a show that watching it, I know that if it had been around when I was a kid, I would have absolutely eaten it up. I would have been so into it. Yeah, I think it'll be really great. Do I think Ringling was a good college? Do I think it's worth the price? Okay, so here's my spiel on education, and I have to be a little careful because I do work in education. But I think there is a lot of really great information online, and I think if you know where to look, that's a much more cost-effective way to do it. I think what you're paying for when you go to college is theoretically someone will point you in the direction to where you need to look. You may not know if you don't have someone to tell you. And I think that what you're really, really paying for is community with other artists and building those connections, because those connections come with you for your entire career. So I think if you can afford art school and you can make the cost work for you, I think it's worth it. But I think that for a lot of people, the cost is just so astronomical that I don't know. That's really a decision you have to make. For me, I think I spent the first few years out of school feeling like I was angry about my art school experience. And the more time that passes, the more I think, well, I just don't know that I would have found my footing and my way as quickly as I did had I not paid for art school there. So, you'll get mixed responses. I think probably, I think there are certain individuals who will probably succeed no matter where they go to school. Because frankly, it really doesn't matter. It's about if you're getting the right information and if you're able to build those connections. And there are alternate ways to build connections than art school, but for me, that worked well. And I was fortunate to be in a position where I had some scholarship money. I was an RA when I was in school, which helped with rooming and boarding expenses. And then I had a little bit of help from my parents, and then I had some student loans. So for me, the cost wasn't as astronomically expensive. And I think it cost literally half what it would cost to go there today. So I don't know. I mean, it's such a personal decision. And I think $200,000, if you're going to go $200,000 into debt, is a lot of money. But I do think that, yeah, it's one thing to say, look at tutorials online, but I think it's really hard to know the order that you should go with them and to have a real gauge on if you're doing it right. So, I think it's a balance. I think it's a balance. Um, Based on my experience, what advice do I have for people trying to break into the industry, especially younger college students? Yeah, so in my class that I teach, I have a whole lecture that I give that's basically breaking into animation. So I think there's sort of three things you can do. The number one thing is making sure your portfolio is ready and is industry ready. Because when an art director is looking through your portfolio, they want to see that you can do the job now. I unfortunately, because animation has gotten to this point where there's not a lot of time to train someone up to speed. They need to basically drop you into production and you have to be ready to go. So they have to look at your portfolio and know that you can literally do the job now, that, there might be minor things that you need to be trained on. This is where we put our files here. This is how we label things. Our vendors like this specific thing to be on the sheet, stuff like that. You can learn when you get into the studio, but are you a good draftsman? Do you have a sense of appeal? Can you hit the style of the show? All of those are things that you really need before you can get in. So number one is making sure your portfolio is industry standard today. It has to be industry ready. Number two is once you have great work, now you can start trying to reach out to people. So ways that you can reach out to people and build your network are social media. That is one way. I do think that algorithms are not as always as artist friendly as they once were. So it can be challenging, but I think if you post consistently, you'll still eventually get eyes on your work. And there are specific hashtag days that are really great. So there's a recurring event called Portfolio Day. And if you post your work with that hashtag portfolio day or hashtag visible women or hashtag AAPI artists or, whatever it is, if you do that, recruiters will literally use those known hashtags and scroll through to find artists who they think might be a good fit for their show. So I definitely think that utilizing social media is great for that. I think you also, in addition to social media, should consider trying to track down the emails or contact information of different recruiters at different companies. And actually a really great way to do that is if you go on LinkedIn and search for the recruiter of whatever company, you can usually find them there. And you can either message them on LinkedIn or ask for their personal email if they have it listed or if they don't have it listed. But usually, you can find recruiters. And I think bugging recruiters is actually the most kosher way to get your work directly to a studio, because a recruiter's job is to find talent. So if you're someone who they see and they keep an eye on, they will remember you and they'll throw your name onto lists that are then passed around to art directors, and art directors make the final call. But recruiters are often sort of stocking the pond that then the art directors go fishing from. So reach out to recruiters. I think that's really great. And then the third thing that I think is good, once you have the portfolio, once you've started, trying to make connections online, is if you're financially able to, and if you are, not with COVID, this is extra complicated, I get. But there are in-person events, and I think they're finally starting to happen again this fall. A really great one is Lightbox Expo in Pasadena. But go to those in-person events, because when you go and you sort of like connect a face to a name, especially if you've already talked online, people will remember you. And it's just something different about making that face-to-face connection. So and often at events like Lightbox Expo, there's recruiters from all of the big studios there, and they'll have long lines where you can sit and wait to have your work looked at by them. So, if they find someone who they think is really great and is really killing it, they'll often reach out to them. So bring your business card, bring your portfolio with you, and that can be a really great way to break in. But I think those three things. So make sure your work is ready, reach out online, and then make an in-person connection if possible. What is the most challenging part of my career that almost made me give up? I think so. Two things. One is that it's a gig economy. And I think that when I was a student, I was promised a version of the industry that doesn't exist and probably hasn't existed for a long time. So this is something I always really want to make transparently clear to students is it's a gig economy. So what that means is you get hired onto a project, and then when the project ends, you may or may not still have a job at the studio. Oftentimes, if you're great to work with and studios love you, which if you do a good job and you're, a hard worker and you care about your work, is not that hard to be that person. Oftentimes they will try to staff internally, which is part of the advantage of working for a bigger studio, is that there are multiple projects going on, but it doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes there's something, if you were working on like a preschool show and they have this new, I don't know, like horror anime show, you may not be the right fit for that show, even though there's an open position on it. And sometimes there just isn't a project that's staffing at the time that you roll off. So, ideally studios like to hold on to people, but it's not guaranteed. So I think preparing yourself both mentally and financially for those dry spells is important. But I say this, and I'm a person who, you heard my employment history. I've mostly stayed employed for the 10 or so years of my career. So I was anxious about it, but it was fine. And I think for most people who are willing to work hard and be friendly and be good to work with, it's fine for them. The second challenging thing that I think has affected me more later in my career than it did early on was just that feeling of burnout that you get and that feeling of stagnation. And I think it comes from the fact that, like, when you're a visual development artist, your goal is to help design someone else's vision. That's the inherent part of the job. Hopefully when you're working on it, you get to contribute ideas, and you get to, feel like you had some sort of say in it. And that's great when that happens. But a lot of times the work is not necessarily something where there's a lot of room for personal input. It might be that it's an existing property and you're, you just have to match what's already been done. That was the case on the Boss Baby show, is like, this is an existing franchise. So, we can come up with things, but it all has to fit within this world that is already established. Or, the other thing is sometimes they'll be like, hey, we need a plate. Don't make it too fancy. We don't want it to stand out. So you just draw like, a circle and a plate. So there are times, especially when you're in the thick of production, where you can feel a little bit like you're not learning and that you're just executing and you're not using your brain. So I think the thing that I've learned over time is it's really, really important to have personal projects, because those remind you of why you do what you do and keep you excited and keep you, they keep that fire alive, basically. And I think it's really, really important. Yeah, so I can share my portfolio. It is just www.betsybauerart.com. So it's in the chat. Sorry about, I should have probably shared at the beginning. I'm so sorry. I'm scrolling back up again. Any portfolio tips specifically for animation? So I think the biggest portfolio tip I have is, make sure that you're showing what you want to do. Which sounds really silly, but I think that there's people, and I get the mentality where you think, okay, well, I don't have a thing that I want to do. I just want to do whatever someone will hire me to do. But when a recruiter looks at your portfolio and it's not specialized, then they don't necessarily know where to place you, because there's more to a job than, just that. Like it goes back to what I was saying before, where you have to be ready to go from the time that they hire you. There's not a ton of ramp up time built into schedules these days. So, if you have strong character design work and strong background work and strong storyboarding work. I would recommend building, separate pages in your portfolio for each of those things so that a recruiter can very easily click on those different sections and see that work there. And it also tells them that you understand the job. If you have kind of everything all in one place, a recruiter is going to look at that and feel like you don't even understand what your role would be. So yeah, making sure that you're specialized in your portfolio and that it really looks like an animation portfolio is important. If I want to do biz dev, should I major in animation or illustration, assuming there isn't something highly specific like entertainment design at the school? So yeah, visual development is very interesting because it does kind of fall between animation and illustration. It's somewhere in between. So my recommendation would be to see if you can find a program that I think that, at its core, visual development is more illustration than it is animation, just because your day-to-day is that you're drawing and painting. You need to have really strong draftsmanship. You need to understand anatomy. You need to understand perspective and color theory. You are an illustrator at your core, but you do have this sort of knowledge that I think it's helpful to have knowledge of the animation pipeline and understand the different steps that go into making an animated project. So if you can find a program that will let you be essentially an illustrator and then take maybe some supplemental filmmaking classes, maybe like a traditional animation class if you're really interested in character design. But yeah, I that would be my personal take on it, but I think every program is they're probably all going to be a little bit different. So it just depends on the school and how it's structured. That's the other thing that's annoying, is that illustration is extremely broad, and animation can also mean kind of a lot of different things depending on the school. So yeah, just do your research into the program. What does a typical workday look like for me? I'm on summer break from teaching right now, which is nice. So that means that I am not really teaching. I'm just kind of doing some prep work here and there, but I don't really have to meet with people on a regular basis unless I have a thing I need to talk to my boss about. So that basically means that I'm not doing that right now. When the fall semester starts, I will be getting up very early California time, like 6 a.m. our time in California, and I will teach for theoretically 3 hours for the classes that I teach Monday through Friday. So that will be then, and then I'll be done by 9, 10 a.m. and I'll sit down and do my studio work. So this morning we're still working from home with Wild Canary and Young Jedi Adventures, just because COVID numbers are still kind of high for California right now. And they're a smaller studio that I think they sort of did the mental math and realized if everybody works from home, they actually probably save money on studio space and utilities and all of that. So we're all working remotely. So I basically just kind of sit down, usually around like 10 a.m. after I've had some coffee, some breakfast, walked my dog, and just kind of sit and work. I like to work on my iPad. I'm a big proponent of the iPad. And so I just kind of like sit in front of the TV usually and stream something. And, we use a piece of software called Slack. So I'll just message my boss if I finish something, or, if I have questions about anything. And yeah, that's just kind of how it's been. And then usually I try to be done working by around 6. I take my dog for a walk, usually with my fiance, and then we maybe go out to dinner somewhere or just have something at home. Yeah, and then go to bed usually by like 10 or so. Yeah, that's kind of a typical work day these days. I don't know if that's what it will look like forever, but while we're still in this like work from home limbo, that's kind of, I don't know, I think it's kind of nice. I like it. So do I think for people who have the skills but are not from the US and have not graduated from college, is it possible to enter the industry? Let's say they do have a visa. Well, I think if you have a visa already, I don't think it matters. I think if you need a visa, I mean, I'm not as familiar with this, so you know, I apologize if I don't have the details correct. You definitely want to double check on all of this, but I'm pretty sure that if you already have a visa, I don't think there's a concern, because I think the hesitation with hiring international artists is that studios often have to pay for the visa, which essentially means that on top of whatever they agree to pay you, they have to pay an extra amount. And I think that theoretically the rules are supposed to be that to hire an international artist, they have to hire someone who is providing something that they cannot find with a domestic worker. And I have heard that it is easier to get a visa if you need a visa as an international student if you have a degree. I think it's one of the major exceptions to the art school conversation that a lot of people have. But yeah, I'm not as familiar with it. I'm really sorry that I can't answer that better, but I do think from what I have heard, it is easier if you have a college degree to get into studios if you're international. If you want to do freelance, what do you think should be in your portfolio for illustration specifically, and how should your resume work? So I think for freelance illustration, so I think you'll want to identify specifically like which markets within illustration you're interested in, because illustration is so broad. So illustration can mean picture books, like publishing, so like children's books, board books. It might even mean like graphic novels, which are, you know, a bigger thing in publishing. It might mean editorial illustration, doing things for like the New York Times and you know, the Washington Post or whatever. Or it might mean like corporate illustration, so doing things for like tech companies like Airbnb or whatever. So I think if you want to go freelance, A, sort of keep your market in mind, and then B, I think if you want to be a freelance illustrator, so I think there's two paths to being an artist professionally. One is to go the studio route, which is the route that I've gone, where you're adaptable and you're kind of a chameleon. The other route is to be an independent artist who is essentially selling themselves. So when someone hires you, they hire you because only you can do what you can do. So I think developing a personal style is going to probably be a much bigger part of the conversation if you want to be a freelance illustrator. For your resume, I think it's always good to have a resume on your website, especially if you're doing that. You might look at, there's this artist who, I love her work. She's more of a fine art painter, but I feel like she has done a really great job of partnering with different brands and does gallery work. And anyway, I think the way that her CVs, her like about/CV is pretty good if you want to be more of an independent artist. So let me scroll back up again. Yeah, so, but yeah, for freelance, I think it's one of those things where it's probably going to be a lot of networking and referral, and it'll probably take you a good amount of time to build up a, you know, a deep enough client list to support yourself exclusively on freelance, but it's possible, and people do it. So I think it's just, yeah, you just have to do great work and then hope that who you are working for will then refer you to one of their friends that's looking for artists. That's usually kind of how those things build. It's just slowly snowballing. What is one of my biggest I wish I had known all along moments career-wise that you can think of? Ooh, I feel like I've had a few of those over the years. I think for me, I don't know, I think something that I'm just now realizing, I think that I wish that I had realized earlier, is like, you don't have to, like, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it. I think feel confident in the choices that you make artistically. Like, I think that like if you're always trying to be a people pleaser and always trying to chase whatever the current trend is, inevitably there's going to be somebody who's doing it better than you are. You know, if you are, you know, if you see that like a specific style is hot right now, and you try to chase that, or, you know, maybe, you know, for me, how I'll speak personally and say that like my goal when I was younger, which I think is a goal that many people have, is to work for Walt Disney Feature Animation. And, obviously I would still love to work there if I ever had a chance to, but I think when I was drawing from the heart and drawing things that I found visually interesting, it didn't necessarily jive with Disney's house style. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it just wasn't hitting the goal that I thought I wanted. So I started trying to change my style so it would feel more actually Disney. And I think in the process of trying to do that, combined probably with doing, lots of different styles for a studio, I kind of felt like I lost my voice a little bit. Like I feel like I had a stronger voice when I was just starting out. And I wish that I had nurtured that more. And it's something that I want to do more moving forward. Everybody grows and changes as an artist. You're kind of not the same artist today as you were yesterday. I feel almost like a little bit like almost like monk-like thinking that way. It's like that old saying of like a river is never the same. It just sort of moves through space. I think that's kind of true with your art and your style, and the way that you problem solve over time will change. But anyway, yeah, I just wish that I had sort of stuck to my guns and just kind of not been afraid to make more of an independent statement versus feeling like I had to fit myself into a mold for a studio that frankly wasn't really interested in working with me anyway. So was my job as a character prop environment designer fun? Did you design characters you liked, or did you design repetitive objects like a thousand rocks? A bit of both. I think like a really great art director is good at understanding when people are going to feel burnt out. So, I mean, the truth is that when you're working on a project, everything has to get designed. So sometimes you'll get something really cool, and sometimes you'll get a thousand rocks to design. And, like I said, a great art director will kind of throw you a bone when you are, kind of feeling burnt out and tired, to be like, hey, we still value you. Like, you're doing a great job. I know that this sucks. It just is something that has to get done. So I've kind of had both experiences. I've had art directors who kind of want to like hoard everything and keep all the cool stuff and then not share with the rest of their team. And I've had art directors who are really supportive and see themselves more as teachers and want to give people different growth opportunities. And that thankfully, the latter is thankfully the case on my current team. It's been really great. So yeah, I've enjoyed working at Wild Canary on Young Jedi adventures. It's been really fun. How important is a good school in your opinion? As I'm from Europe, college doesn't really cost all that much. And even though I have been accepted to a decent animation school and will be attending classes this fall, I am still considering applying to a better school with a better reputation, but that also feels a tad more right, as costs aren't astronomical and I could afford that extra year and all. Well, I think if you can afford it, I don't know. I probably, if I could have afforded it and it was like European style schools, I might have gone back to school again for a couple years. I felt that way after I graduated. I actually really remember looking into doing like Gobelins, or in France has their like 2-year program. I remember, especially when I was really unhappy at Google, I remember like doing a lot of like late night searches, like, how do I do this? How do I get into this? So I don't know. I think like in another life, I might have done that. And I think, it's so personal. I really do think that, if you're getting good knowledge from the schools and it's not that expensive, go for it. Because I think having the structure of school it's a lot easier to stick to a schedule and feel like you're making progress than when you're doing like your independent study. There's some people who can do it great. And I think for others, it's more of a challenge to stay on task and stay with a schedule and have the discipline to do it. But I also think, a lot of times people don't think they're ready, and they are. So I think there's nothing wrong with applying for jobs, even if you are not 100% sure that you're ready, because you never know. I mean, the worst that can happen is you'll get a rejection, and oh well, you're in the same place you were before. So it doesn't really change anything. So yeah, I don't think, I think when it gets dangerous is when you are delaying the inevitable and just keep going to school and keep like being essentially like a professional student. Like I wouldn't do that. At a certain point, you just need to jump and go for it. Maud has a question. Could you explain color scripting? Oh, color scripting. So yeah, this is really cool. I did not know a lot about it until after I was already in the industry. So different companies and different studios and different projects will probably approach this somewhat differently. But basically, in the same way that characters need to be designed, props need to be designed, environments need to be designed, color and lighting need to be designed also. So sometimes, depending on the studio and their workflow, you'll see artists take 3D renders of a sequence essentially, and then they will paint on top of that to provide a guide for the lighting artists when they get into 3D. So my team has been doing it more on the storyboard side. So our painted panels are a lot looser and not necessarily as tight as they would be if they were on top of a 3D render. But yeah, the goal of it is to essentially design like mood and lighting and color throughout a sequence. So for our show, they're little 11-minute episodes. So I'll get an entire 11-minute episode, and we have the storyboards, and my art director takes the time to pull out sort of key moments in those storyboards. It's either there's a change in time of day, there's a change in location, there's a time cut or something, or there's like an effect that provides some sort of light glow. And I'll do like a little almost thumbnail sized painting of each of those storyboards. And in the end, in a 2-week period, I'll do anywhere from like 12 to 24, depending on how much action there is in that episode, of just these little miniature paintings. And a great color script, if the episode allows, will have sort of like a mood shift in it. So you can kind of, which gets into almost like synesthesia, where you're like, what color means what mood and this or that. But yeah, hopefully it should feel a little bit like there's an arc throughout the story, just like there's a clear beginning, middle, and end in storytelling. There should be a clear beginning, middle, and end in the color scripts. This is like something that could be its own full lengthy lecture, but it's really fun, and I really enjoy doing it because I feel it feels a little bit more like you're being an illustrator versus doing like a 4-point turn of I don't know, like a character or whatever, which was great too. I like that stuff too. But any advice for those looking to break into the industry from a different industry? How do I make myself look desirable without having gone to art school, had previous art jobs, etc.? Well, the good news is that it's just your portfolio. So no one really cares about your degree. Like I said, I think art school can be helpful, especially if you need the direction to like know who to talk to, know where to go. But if you've already gone, if you're working in a different industry and you want to transition, that's where I really think that maybe some of those online classes might be great. I have a couple of friends who did other things before they became, artists in animation. Like I have a friend who I think was like a mechanical engineer and then became a storyboard artist. And I think he did it by taking night classes and just kind of building a portfolio on his own time, and then eventually got hired. And so now that's what he's doing for a living. Another friend was like a physicist or something. And yeah, he also just, built a portfolio, took classes, and and yeah, now he's a director at Disney TV. So you definitely don't have to have gone to an art school or an animation degree program. If you have the portfolio and the skills, you can totally get in. Is the crunch culture real in the animation industry, especially if you're a storyboarder or a background artist? So yes and no. So crunch culture in games, I think, is a little different than in animation. Everyone I talk to who works in games always wishes they worked in animation because it is a way better culture than games tends to be with this. That said, there are some studios and some projects that end up being more notorious than others for sort of having unrealistic expectations. But where animation has an advantage over games is that animation is unionized. So basically all of the major studios within the LA industry anyway, and I think this is there's some big changes happening with this that I don't know that I can talk about at this point because we're voting on our final union agreement. But essentially all the big studios are part of the animation union. And that means that as a worker, you're protected, and there are legal things that need to happen if a studio is abusing any of those terms. So, I mean, sometimes, we have more leverage than other times to fix things, but in general, I don't think it's that bad. Like, even when it was really crazy at on like the Troll Hunter shows, like the Tales of Arcadia shows, that's probably the hardest I worked, and the most often I worked overtime. But when I worked overtime, it was paid, and they would buy me dinner, and they capped me at 12 hours of overtime a week. And when I did overtime, if I did those hours, I would have to make 1.5 times my usual hourly rate. So you make way more money when you do it. They buy you dinner, and they told me you can't do it more than 12 hours a week. And even that would have been too much. I think the most I did in a week was usually like 6 to 8 hours, maybe. And I would just stay a little bit later and then go home. But that wasn't forever. And it was just, in like little stints. So like maybe for like a 3-week period or something every, I don't know, 6 months. So I have found that it's not that bad. I think it probably just depends. Now, that said, I'm a designer. I'm not a storyboard artist. I do think that storyboarding can be a bit more intense. TV board schedules are just kind of crazy. But again, I think it's one of those things that as time goes on, and you learn shortcuts and you become a better artist, you just figure out how to manage your time better. But essentially, if a studio isn't giving you enough time, like the mantra among all artists in LA is, then don't do the work. Like, just do what you have time to do, and then the studio will have to adjust, because if the schedule is unrealistic, then that's not your fault. And thankfully, yeah. So I'm sorry, I'm trying to go through a few more answers. I think we're at noon here, so I probably should take off before too much longer. Thank you for the nice comments on my portfolio. Do I prefer working remotely? I personally do. I would really love to have a situation where I go into the studio like once or maybe twice a week, mostly just to be social, though. I prefer to work in my own space for sure. If someone doesn't have an industry-ready portfolio, is it not optimal to look for work project experience when they should focus on honing their portfolio? I feel like I gave conflicting advice with this. I think it's never bad to start looking. Like, I think if you want to look, you should look. But I think if you're not getting the response that you're hoping you get, I think that's when you need to really take a serious look at your portfolio and kind of ask yourself, okay, well, is this industry standard? Is it ready? And if the answer is no, then, I still don't think it necessarily hurts to apply to stuff, because you never know. But definitely, if you're not getting work, work on your portfolio some more. I feel like I forgot. Yes. Yes. Sorry, I know there's a whole bunch here. Yeah, so I'll answer one more question, and then I'm gonna take off. I'm trying to find a good one here. Okay. So what are some good practices to help you get better at art? I feel like that's a really good one. That's sort of evergreen. So I think if you want to be a better artist working in animation, it's always really good to just build your visual vocabulary. So do sketches from life. I love to go to the zoo to sketch. That's my absolute favorite place, because there's animals to draw, there's people to draw, there's usually interesting plants and other environment things to draw. I love drawing at the zoo. I think get a zoo membership and go and sketch like once a week if you are having trouble improving. And I think the exercise that I did in college that helped me grow more than anything else is I bought a sketchbook, like a little one that would fit into like a bag that I could take with me. And I just drew with pen in it, and I would number out how many pages I thought I should complete in a day, so that I had an actual target. And I knew that I wanted to do like one sketch of a person on each page that I observed. And so I would go to a coffee shop or I would sit in the campus cafeteria and sketch them. And I filled up, I think, like 2 or 3 of those little sketchbooks in a semester. And I felt like that more than anything else really helped me develop a style. So yeah, that's what I recommend. Draw and paint from life if you want to get better. And I think that should pretty much do it. Yeah, thanks everyone for hanging out with me for the past hour. If you want to get in touch at any point, I'll put my email in the chat. So if you want to, oops, sorry, I think I did that privately. It is betsybauerart@gmail.com. And yeah, my website is also betsybauerart.com. So thanks everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.